Hello, welcome to intro to power carving, introduction to power carving. My name is Katie Freeman. Thank you to those of you who are able to join me live. And then thank you to all of you who have bought the ticket in order to receive this recording. Now, those of you who are live, you got to graciously deal with my technical difficulties as I worked through the course, losing power once and then losing Wi-Fi, so having to switch over to my phone. I very much am grateful to you for your patience in dealing with those, and also for the questions you had during the class. I know that that's not only valuable to myself, but then valuable to those of you who are now watching after the live event. So I state at the end that I will be including in the email with this video links to all of the different tools and safety equipment that I talk about during the class, and you can look at all of those and choose to buy or not buy, choose to use that brand or not use that brand, all up to you, but the links are included. I will let you know that those are affiliate links, which just means that when you purchase it, places like Amazon is going to give me a very small fee for you using that specific link. I will also include the link to my online course. It is a pre-recorded course called Power Carving Magic. In that course, it's about 2 hours long. I teach you how to use a die grinder, all the very specific parts of using a die grinder to carve and add texture. And all of the techniques and safety stuff that I teach in that class on a die grinder can be applied to a rotary tool. So if you would like to learn more in-depth knowledge about using either one of those, a smaller rotary tool or a die grinder, I encourage you to take that class. The link is there. And because you've purchased a ticket for this class, that ticket price goes towards the online course. And so there will be some money savings there for you overall. And since it's pre-recorded, you can do it all at your own pace, and you can go back and rewatch all the parts that you want to rewatch. So that's also an added benefit. I happily welcome questions. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Freeman Furnishings, or you can send me an email, freemanfurnishings@gmail.com. Either way, I'm happy to answer your questions. And I am excited to see some of you get into power carving because it's something that I love, and I love to share what I love with you. So thank you so much. And let's go ahead and go forward with the course. So I do have a few slides to go through. And we're going to go kind of back and forth between the slides and me showing the actual tools and talking through it. I really want you guys to like chime in with questions as we go along to make sure, you know, that you're getting your specific questions answered. Otherwise, we can get started. I'm just going to hit record on another device over here. Give me 1 second. So really what this is designed to be is kind of, like it says, it's an introduction to power carving to give you an idea of the various different tools that you can use to do power carving, a little bit about, you know, technique with each kind of tool. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but I do want to talk about what you would use that tool for, like what type of power carving. And then I really do want to focus on safety because that's definitely something you want to consider before jumping into power carving and all the different safety things you might need to get going. So, all right. So we're going to talk tools, and the way I like to do my power carving is to start with the largest tool to the smallest tool. And really the largest tool you could start with is a chainsaw, but you're really only going to need that if you're dealing with like large chunks of wood and you want to remove larger pieces at a time. If you've never used a chainsaw before, I would recommend looking for a local like chainsaw safety course before you try using one, just so that you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. Beyond that, I'm not really going to talk much about chainsaws today. Just for one, I don't use them a lot. So I really want to focus on the kind of next size down of tools, which is the angle grinder. So in the angle grinder, you can see kind of the top right there, what a general picture of one looks like. There's various different sizes. I use the 4.5-inch angle grinders. They do have 7-inch angle grinders. Those tend to be used more on like construction sites. They're going to be more powerful. They use 7-inch discs on them. And so it's just going to have a lot more torque to it. Definitely something that's going to take more time to get used to handling. I have never found a need to use a 7-inch angle grinder, and I've done quite large pieces. A 4.5-inch seems to work just fine for me. And there's various different types of attachments you can use on an angle grinder, a 4.5-inch angle grinder. The first picture down below the angle grinder is showing what is called carving discs or carving dishes. It kind of depends on what brand you're working with, on what they call it. And then the next picture down is called a multi-cutter. So I'm gonna stop sharing so I can show these in real life here. All right, so I will start with, oops, I'm going to start with the multi-cutter. So this is my angle grinder. This one happens to be a Makita. I'll turn around so you guys can read that the correct way. A Makita. The multi-cutter I have on here right now, this is a 3-inch wheel. It comes with, you can also get a 2-inch wheel and then a 4-inch wheel. And they come in different shapes. So the cutters on these, let's see if I can get up kind of close, are going to be round. You can see there. Same with this one that I have on the actual tool right now. You can see that those little carving bits on there, this is what's doing the carving, is round, but they also have triangle ones. And I have one of those as well, but predominantly I use the ones with the rounded edge. So let me hold this up real quick. So this is what your standard angle grinder is going to look like. And if I can hold these back to back, you can see that on this one, it's connected just straight to the front little bolts there that comes out. But on this one, this is how the other one would work. You'd have that dish right here, but instead you connect this whole arm on and it turns it sideways. To me, one of the many benefits of using a tool like this is it's a little bit more ergonomic. It has this angle, which you can adjust the angle of this any direction you want to. But it puts the handle here and it allows me to kind of tuck it in to the side so that it's more ergonomic to use as I'm carving the piece. Less force on your elbows and your forearms, and you can use your whole body when you're using this. So for me, this is my largest tool that I'm starting with, the multi-cutter. And that, as this spins and carves away the piece, generally you do kind of a left to right motion with it, and it's going to spit chips out. It's not really creating dust, but chips. And it really takes care of getting rid of a lot of the material very quickly, but it's also smooth enough and allows you to use enough finesse that you can do some like very tight, light passes and get into some detailed work with it. If you want to switch out to things like the bigger or the smaller blades, it's a matter of changing these out. And when you buy this kit, it it comes with all the tools to change it out, and it's pretty simple to use. So this company is a South Korean, yes, South Korean company. Oh, Jean, yes, question. What's the name of the tool it is attached to? Okay, so Jean, do you want to unmute so I can make sure I understand your question?
Yeah, sorry. I'm just very new at this. So is that two separate tools or are those two different? Yeah.
Yep. So you would buy the angle grinder as just an angle grinder that you could pick up from like Lowe's, Home Depot, any big box store.
Okay.
And then this whole arm, this whole attachment plus this is called the multi-cutter, and it's from a company called Manpa Tools. That is
Okay.
a South Korean company. There are some US companies that sell it, so you can get it from the US. And one of those is King Arthur's Tools. And you can buy other carving stuff there as well, but they do sell this there. So yes, this would be two separate tools. So to give you an idea of cost too, an angle grinder is generally going to run you somewhere, a 4.5-inch angle grinder is going to run you somewhere between $65 to $100. If you get the brands like Makita, Milwaukee, they're going to last you a really long time. You can go to like Harbor Freight and get a cheaper angle grinder. However, those motors tend to burn out. So you might be able to pick one up for $35, but you're probably going to have to buy more than one and buy it frequently. So it's definitely worth the investment if you buy one of the, like, I'm pretty sure this one was $85. And to me, it's worth it. It's lasted a couple years already. And there's no signs that the motor's having any issues. This attachment here, if you buy the full attachment with the 3-inch multi-cutter blade on it, just as this unit, it all comes whole here. This is about $250. I've been using it for 3 years. I have not had to buy any replacement bits, which you can just buy these little cutters as replacements. They just screw off and you screw new ones on. I haven't had to buy any of those. So $250 has lasted me 3 years, and I do quite a bit of carving. So it's quite a bit of money, but it lasts. It's kind of one of those buy once, cry once type of deals. Any other questions on this unit? I know I'm talking fast. All right, so next I'm going to talk about this one, which is again, 4.5-inch angle grinder. And this has a carving dish or disc on it, depending on the company that you would order this from. They call them different things. They're both, but they're the same thing. So carving disc or dish means the same thing. This one that I happen to have on here is from King Arthur Tools. And they make one with holes in it, which is meant so that as it's spinning, it's creating a window through the disc to the workpiece. And it's really more about personal preference there. Some people really like that. I bought them because I thought, hey, that might work out really nice for me. And what I learned is that I personally am more of a tactile person. So rather than looking through the disc and trying to tell if I need to smooth out a certain area, if I have a ridge, or if I want to go deeper, I'm going to turn the tool off and feel the workpiece itself to see if there's an area that needs to be smoothed out or whatnot. So these carving disc or dishes have different side profiles to them. So I want to show these side by side here. You can see that this one has a bit more of a round to it, or more of a radius, whereas this one flattens out, levels out a little bit more. And that's because they have two different uses to them. So one that has more of this rounded radius to it, you're going to use to do like bowls or carve out seats with. And that's because you're trying to get that curved surface on the wood. So by using one of these, you're not going to end up with a bunch of like burn marks or lines that you're not looking to have. Whereas this one, because it is flatter, it's going to be used on flatter surfaces that you go along with. So if you were to use something with this flatter profile on it for say like a bowl or a seat, you're going to end up with getting kind of edge marks or lines in it. They're going to just have to end up sanding out or take out with lower grit or higher grit type of textures of dishes or discs. So that's really, you have these two kind of profile choices to choose from. There's 3 companies really that you can buy these from. King Arthur Tools, Kutzall, Kutzall, and Sabertooth. Those are the different sources for those products. The other thing about discs and dishes is they come in different gradients or grits, kind of like sandpaper. So like this one is a medium. This one's like an extra coarse. And the one I have on the angle grinder right now is like a fine. So just like when you're sanding wood, you're going to work coarsest to finest. That's going to mean that you get to do less sanding in the end, which is always good because sanding is not generally anybody's favorite thing to do. Any questions on those? And these go just straight on an angle grinder. Okay, so you get your angle grinder again from a big box store, and then you would purchase one of these. These run cost-wise between $35 and about $50, depending on the brand that you buy from. And they also last quite a while. I've had some of these King Arthur ones for probably 4 years. I will admit that they're probably getting close to ready to replace, but they've lasted that long without needing to change them out. The multi-cutter created chips. These create basically fine sawdust. This is speed sanding essentially. And so there's a lot of dust that comes off of this. You would want to do this outside. Power carving in general, you're going to want to either do outside, or if you're in a closed space, maybe having the shop vac hose clamped right next to where you're doing the carving, and you'll always want to wear a dust mask of some kind. Okay. All right. So that is the biggest tool that I tend to start with is the angle grinder, multi-cutter, and then the discs or the dishes. I'm only using those for if I'm doing a sculpted log table, if I'm doing a decent sized bowl. And by decent size, I'm generally talking 8-inch diameter or bigger. Once you get smaller than that, it's just pretty complicated. That's why I like to use them. They're fairly safe to use. With the dishes and the disc, you're usually doing like a pull method. You're kind of going front to back with them. And with the multi-cutter, you're doing kind of a left to right, or I'm sorry, a right to left motion with it. Either one of those is just going to take a little bit of time for you to feel comfortable in using them. All right. So let's go to the next size of tool, which is one of my favorites. And that is a die grinder. So the die grinder, this one again happens to be a Makita. That tends to be the brand that I like to use. You can get them in single speed or variable speed. This one happens to be single speed, and it's about 25,000 RPMs, revolutions per minute. It's pretty simple. There's just a little button on the bottom to turn the power on, and then you're holding it both here and down here. And it's spinning what is called a carving burr at the end. And carving burrs, I think, is probably like my favorite thing to use just because they're pretty versatile. So not only can you create shape on the surface. Okay, let me see what I can. Get connected here. I want to share the next slide with you guys. All right, let me see if I can flip the video around. Okay. So let's see. There we go. All right, so die grinder is the top right. Carving burrs there. There's different shapes. I'll show you some of the shapes that I have. And then we're also going to talk about sanding. So the die grinder is a type of rotary tool. It just tends to be a bit more powerful. When I say rotary tool, most people are familiar with a Dremel. That is also a rotary tool. It's just smaller and not as powerful, but there are carving burrs that fit that size as well. And I have some right here. I have one right here. This is one of my rotary tools, my small one. So we'll talk about that as well. Okay. All right, so wanted to show you a picture of some texture in case you are not familiar with what I'm talking about. So I have a pro tip here, which is just to create a sample board if you're using a die grinder or rotary tool with carving burrs, so that you have an idea of what kind of texture you can create. But this is what I'm talking about when I say texture, and it's really just using the carving burr, placing it on the surface to use the shape of the burr itself to create unique patterns. So these are a variety of different shapes of burrs that I used on a board that I painted black first so that I could really see kind of the texture and contrast. And this is a board that I keep in my shop to reference when I'm working on a project and want to add texture, to have an idea of what the different patterns could be, and different shapes created by different shapes on the surface of the wood created by the shapes of the burrs. Now I'm curious, I want to ask you both a question, and that is, when you signed up for the class, was there a particular type of power carving you thought you'd be interested in? Like, are you interested in more of the pattern texture type stuff, or are you looking maybe of creating larger pieces?
I currently work with composite plywood, really flat wood. And so I don't
Mhm.
have any experience working with carving tools, but I found your account and was very intrigued by your ability to, mold wood. It got me
Mhm.
really excited about pushing my materials more three-dimensional. So I'm really here just as a complete newbie to learn whatever you have to offer.
Awesome.
So, and I did one project where I just used an angle grinder and made kind of a bowl project.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
just made me realize that I had a lot to learn and I don't really know anything about the other tools. And clearly I needed something a little bit finer than that. And like
Okay.
you were talking about, like doing stuff and then having to sand forever to smooth it out, like, kind of the process. And I wanted to know, well, texture I'm really interested in, but also B, like, what's the process so that you can minimize that having to try to sand out these deep grooves that
Yeah.
you make. So, and just learning more about the tools available.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I wish I could all tell you that eventually you could get to a point where you use just carving tools and never have to sand, but I have yet to find that. So, um, yeah. Well, but there is definitely ways to get to a point where you're using more carving tools, less sanding. And we can talk about that as we get through it. And then, Christy, when you're talking about like molding wood, do you have more of an example of like what kind of caught your eye?
I have just seen I just looked at a lot of different projects where, people are incorporating texture into bowls, or texture, on the outside of bowls,
Mhm.
or flat pieces, and I just kind of find it mesmerizing to watch it happen. And I'm just curious, just want to learn more about how to incorporate texture. And I also like to know a little bit about what materials are best to start with. Like, do you
Okay.
start with green wood? Do you start with,
Mhm.
where do you get your wood, and what do you start with on these projects?
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both for telling me a little bit more. So kind of have an idea. Um, Let me talk through just a few more of the tools that I have over here, and then we can kind of get into talking about material and some specifics there. So let me see here. So I showed you guys the die grinder, which again is just it's a larger version of like a Dremel, higher speed, and you're going to use bigger carving burrs on it. Um, so like the one I have on here, that's like a 1/2 inch ball, but they go all the way up to like this is a 1 inch ball on there. And then I also have a couple different shapes. This is called a flame burr, which a lot of people really like this one, just because of the different shapes of texture you can get, and you can get more of a draw to use this for texture. You get kind of a half moon shape by just using the edge there. So those are some of the burr sizes for the die grinder. For a rotary tool, you're going to have much smaller. Okay, Chris, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a quick question. So, and sorry if this is like totally off the mark. On the bits that you use in the die grinder, can you
Yeah.
use those in like a cordless drill? And is it just a matter of having is it a safety issue? Would it be an issue with it just being
Yeah,
harder to control?
I think it would be harder to control. I mean, that is a good question. I've never tried it in a drill. I use a lot of sanding attachments in a drill, but I've never tried the the carving bit. I feel like it would be a little bit more of a safety issue and control, just because for one reason, mainly is safety wise, when you're using a carving burr bit, you're wanting to use it more in this direction versus straight down. If you go straight down, you're going to get like chatter and kickback. So you never want to go more than 45-degree angle to the workpiece. And I feel like if you used a drill, like just the ergonomics of how you would have to hold the drill, and also being able to get into tight spaces, it probably wouldn't allow as much for that. Whereas the die grinder, because it is like, you know, it's more just a cylinder, straight cylinder, it allows you to kind of work around and get into tighter spaces along that 45-degree angle. That would be my opinion. I would say you could try it. I would just be careful.
All right, thanks.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so this is my smaller rotary tool that I use. And again, these burrs are much smaller. So when you're talking shank diameter here, the die grinder ones are going to be a 1/4-inch shank diameter. Rotary tool ones are going to be an 1/8-inch shank diameter. And just like the die grinder ones, they come in various sizes. I just happen to have a flame burr on this one at the moment. The brand I'm using for this one is Worx, WORX, and it's this whole Worx Maker X set, which is a cordless set, which can be, it's corded but cordless, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. So it comes with this battery pack that has this cord on it that plugs into the bottom of the tools. And so this Maker X kit comes with a bunch of different tools you can use. It. So it has this rotary tool. It also has, which is one of my favorite tools to use, a mini grinder. Okay, so basically a very small version of an angle grinder, and you're using very small tools. I like to use it for sanding, right? So you can put these little sanding wheels, which you can buy from Amazon, you can buy from Home Depot, Lowe's, all those places. Put it on there, and this allows you to really get in tight and smooth out surfaces. You can also use kind of one of these with a pad on it. And you can also get these little teeny tiny 2-inch carving discs from King Arthur and from Sabertooth that fit on that mini grinder. So if you need to do some smaller detail work, it's perfect. So I highly recommend this Worx Maker X set. I think if you just want, because I just bought it as part of a giveaway that I did. If you just want the mini grinder and the rotary tool, and I think it automatically, I think the smallest set of it you can get is the rotary tool, the mini grinder, and then it also comes with a wood burning tool that works with it, all the same cordless setup. It was, I believe, I want to say it was like $140 on Amazon. The battery life is pretty good on it. It lasts a little over an hour on the battery setup, which is pretty good for cordless carving options. Most of my carving tools are all corded because I don't like to be restricted by battery life. But usually by the time I'm using the small rotary tool or the mini grinder for sanding, I don't need like a ton of time on there. So highly recommend those two tools. And again, you can buy it off of Amazon. I believe Worx is available at Home Depot as well, and maybe Lowe's too. Any questions on that, the mini grinder and the rotary tool?
Nope.
Okay. So like I said, I like to use the mini grinder for sanding a lot. Like it's just easier. I mean, you can see how easy it fits in my hand. It's just easier to control. It does vibrate a lot. So I will say after about an hour, you stop it, your hands are going to tingle a little bit, which is kind of the name of the game when it comes to power carving. But the other one I do use is I do use my drill. And I use a different variety of sanding tools on my drill. What is on here right now is called a nylon flat brush. You can buy them on Amazon. And the only other place that I have found that you can buy them like in person is Ace Hardware. I can't find them at Lowe's or Home Depot, but Ace stocks them. I use these. Let's say I did some texture on a surface and I just wanted to smooth out some of the hard edges, but not fully sand it down. I'm going to use one of these. They come in coarse, medium, and fine. The fine is on here right now. And it's just going to take like the pointy edge off of it, off the top of that texture to make it a little smoother. The other place that I use this a lot is I'm a big fan of the Shosuji bond technique, which means you burn the surface of the wood. And then I use one of these to remove any of the loose debris. And basically you don't have to add any finish then on top. Like that is your finish. And it's super smooth and just really velvety. It's one of my favorite things to do. But I also use one of these. Again, this is like an Amazon buy. This fits in my drill. I will say, kind of circling back to the earlier question, I've tried to use these on a die grinder. Do not. It's not meant to be on a die grinder. So I use it on a drill. You can take this cushion off if you want, but I like it because you can see it flexes and it bends and it allows you to get into those curved surfaces of a bowl or a spoon or whatever curved surface you might be working with. It's going to be all on the surface though. So those are some of the sanding tools that I like to use. I wanted to take a minute to talk about safety stuff to make sure that you're using. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that power carving is very dusty, like very dusty to do. So I make sure I have a really good dust mask. I used to wear our Z mask, and nothing against that product. It's just that with power carving, I was still getting dust up underneath the mask and was not good. So I transitioned to one of these that with the rubber around it, it gives a full seal, so I don't get I'm not breathing in any dust. I always wear hearing protection, whatever version you might have of that, I do over the ear. And then probably the biggest thing safety-wise that I have found, especially since I'm a woman and most of these carving tools are designed for men, the vibration and the size of the handle, I've ended up with tennis elbow. And so the best way I have found to combat some of that is I use these fingerless gloves. These happen to be firm grip fingerless gloves. They don't make them in women's sizes. They only make them in men. However, even the large men's size, because they're fingerless, they work. I do fingerless because I don't ever want to get a glove caught in a spinning carving tool. That would not be good. But these have really good padding on the palm and up by your fingers. And so that reduces a lot of the vibration, still allows you to feel how the tool interacts with the wood. Because that is what I have found just with practice is you really get in a rhythm with your tools and the wood and how they interact together. So you can feel like if you're hitting the grain in the wrong way and you want to still be able to have that feeling, whereas full finger gloves don't, at least for me, don't allow for that. Another suggestion that I've talked with like an ergonomics kind of expert on, and I found it very useful. was that if these are just like way too big for you, just using bike gloves, like bicycle gloves, same thing because they're fingerless. They'll basically do the same thing for you. So those are my safety tips, plus safety goggles. Sometimes I will wear like a face shield, just because, especially when I'm using the multi-cutter and chips are flying, sometimes they kind of come back towards your face. So even with safety glasses, they can kind of work their way up under. So sometimes I will use a face shield, but that's not needed for most of the time. I do want to talk a little bit about how to hold wood pieces. Does anybody have a question while I'm grabbing a chunk of wood here?
What was the name of the mask that you had?
It's Trend, Trend, Trend.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so this is also by the company Works, just like that small rotary tool mini grinder. Again, that's WORX. This is what I use to hold my work pieces for an extremely long time, and it worked really well. So it's a portable workbench. It can also turn into sawhorses. I picked it up at Lowe's. They come with 2 clamps, and they have like a track built in for the clamps. So it's pretty easy. You can just slide, it just slides right into the track there. And then you kind of put it down in place, and you can put your workpiece in it, and then just tighten up the clamp. So it comes with 2 of them. So if you have a long enough piece, you can manage both sides. It's not going to hold it perfectly still, but it's still going to keep a piece from, if you hit the grain wrong, to have it come flying back at you. So I definitely would recommend one of these. I liked it so much, I went and bought a second one after I bought the first one. They were $100 at Lowe's. And I still use them, not for carving anymore necessarily, but I use them for all kinds of different stuff. I really like the slotted track with the integration of the clamps and all the different things you can do with it. You can see the name a little bit better here. Works Pegasus is what the name of the bench is. Okay. So that's, to me, this is kind of like level 1, or even before I had one of those benches, honestly, I would just clamp it down to the work surface using a regular clamp. The only downside to that is you have to keep moving the clamp as you're working. And if you're using a bowl, or you're making a bowl, as you're carving away the outside, it gets harder and harder to clamp to the surface. So that's just something to be aware of. This is probably the best thing to use for holding a workpiece. It is pricier, higher end, but I can't tell you how much time this thing has saved me. So this is called Jaw Horse, JAW Horse. This brand is Triton, and I have the Super Jaws XXL. They have not quite as extreme versions of this, but it works pretty simple. You put your workpiece in, you pull that close, you flip down the lock, and then you use the foot pedal to tighten all the way down, and then this is not going anywhere. So I use this pretty much for everything that I can. Extremely large pieces, I'm not going to be able to fit in this, but to be honest, extremely large pieces don't really need to be locked down too much. It's just for the smaller pieces. questions on holding work pieces? Okay. Let me get back to our little presentation here to talk about materials. All right, so materials was one of the questions, and there is a variety of materials you can use. So when you're getting started, I would recommend to just start with some scrap wood, smaller in size. You can use it for trying out different techniques and smaller projects. You'd be amazed at how many like spoons you can carve out of scrap wood or smaller bowls. The other source of wood that I personally use are logs. And that's because you can generally find them for free out of on like Facebook Marketplace when people are selling firewood or giving away logs for firewood. I also have teamed up with several local tree services to get logs of various sizes. Most of the time you can get them for free. If you can't get them for free, they'll charge you just a very minimal fee for like cutting off a chunk of a log or just for picking it up. And by minimal fee, I'm talking like $5 to $10 a piece. So that is a very reasonable source of wood. Now, I personally do not carve plywood. It's just not my aesthetic. But I know there are several power carvers who do carve plywood, and it's very easy to do. It's probably easier to carve than logs or any other hardwood. So that would be an option. If you were you can totally carve like MDF as well. I would just be leery, just like with anything with MDF, that, you know, some people are highly allergic to it. So definitely make sure you're wearing a dust mask in a well-ventilated area before you try carving on MDF. But really, you can carve on anything. If you're carving on a softer wood, usually you can do it, absolutely. It's just going to create stringier sawdust. I don't know any better way to describe it than that. Which just means that you might have a little bit more sanding work to do. Like I said, I tend to use logs and hardwoods to carve. That's usually what I'm carving. But I have a good friend who carves plywood and does well with that. You don't have to use as coarse of discs or carving burrs when you're doing plywood, just because it's softer. So you can start with a more like a medium to fine. The company Sabertooth does have a line of what they call their Whisper burrs and discs, and Whisper is like super fine. I haven't had a chance to try them out yet, but I've talked with people who have, and they say it doesn't eliminate the need for sanding, but it definitely reduces the amount of sanding that you have to do. So I think if you're looking at, you know, not wanting to have to do quite as much sanding, I generally work from like coarse to medium to fine. And then if you had the Whisper series, you could do the Whisper series, and then really you're just doing touch-up work with sanding. So what questions do you guys have? I mean, I really want to make sure I'm getting all of your guys' questions answered on specifics.
Can you just mention a little bit more about like what's your starting process when you start with a log? Like how do you go from a log to something that you can then carve? Do you have to remove all the bark first? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, good question, great question. So I generally I like to start by working from the inside out, and that's mainly because I want to hold the workpiece with as much material as possible. Um, so if I'm starting with like a log and I'm doing a bowl, then I'm gonna clamp up that log into my jaw horse, and I'm gonna get the inside scooped out and carved to almost finished dimension. Um, and then I'm basically gonna flip it over and start working on the outside to get the shape on the outside that I want. I've gone both directions. I've, used like a chisel to take the bark off before doing it. Otherwise, I just use generally my angle grinder and one of the carving dishes to essentially sand the bark off. It really just depends. I do want to say I carve my wood when it's dry, which for me generally means if it's a smaller log, it's probably like a year before, and it's freshly cut, it's going to be a year before I carve on it. If it's a larger piece, it's going to be a couple of years or more. I do have a moisture meter, which is a meter with 2 prongs on it. You stick down into the wood and it will tell you the moisture level. And I generally don't want to carve anything that's higher than 12% moisture. And that's really so that I wouldn't want to carve. I have never tried to carve green wood. I know people who have, and it's kind of like if you were going to do turning or lathe work and you do green wood, you run the risk of it cracking as it dries after you've carved it. So that's why I tend to work with it after I'm pretty sure it's 12% moisture level or lower. So I carve out the inside and then I work to the outside, get to rough shape. And then if I'm gonna do texture, I usually get it pretty close to final shape first and then add texture. So texture is usually the last thing I do. So sometimes I'll even sand the surface before I add the texture. I will add, so I'll be sending out the recorded version of this that I'll get to piece together since my computer decided to not work all the way this morning. But I'll send out the recorded version of this later on today. And if you guys have further questions later on, you can email me or reach out on Instagram. But my email is just freemanfurnishings@gmail.com. And then I wanted to let you guys know I do have like a pre-recorded online course that teaches you how to use, like teaches in detail all the uses you have for a die grinder. And it can also be applied to a rotary tool just because they're basically the same, just one's more powerful than the other. So I have that available. I'll be sending the link out to that as well as a coupon code, because basically if you take that course, I'm applying what you paid for this introductory course to that, so that you wouldn't be paying the full price. So there's that available as well. Yeah, what other questions? I'm curious. Jean, you said you carved a bowl and you feel like you needed more help with that. So is there any specific questions you had on that process?
I'll come in and show my face for a second. I make artwork on plywood, so I'm cutting out these like organic shapes. And so I haven't tried a bowl yet, but I'm writing a grant to like extend my practices. And so I wanted to come here to see sort of like what would be the top 3 things I would get to sort of start extending more 3-dimensional. And it was I guess it was the belt cutter was the one, and the multi-cutter that seemed sort of, the obvious first step to go. And then maybe the die grinder too. So I think what it is I just don't know the names of, what you think would be like the basic 4 things to start with. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know the language necessary to even ask the right questions.
No, I totally understand. So I always go based on size of your projects, right? So if it's a bowl or something larger, if you're doing like sculptural artwork, I would say multi-cutter, and then just I would recommend a secondary angle grinder, so you're not having to change out heads between that multi-cutter dimension attachment, and then the disc one. That's why I have several of them, so I don't have to spend my time just changing out tools. So I would recommend those 2 because they're going to do the most like material removal and still allow you to do like some flow and shaping. Like there's several people, who like to carve in kind of like wavy figures using the angle grinder and the carving disc. So you don't have to have the smaller die grinder. You can do a lot of shaping just with angle grinders. It's just that a die grinder allows you to do maybe more detailed work, right? And have a little bit more control. So that's what I would say is an angle grinder and the multi-cutter combo, and then an angle grinder and carving disc for larger pieces. If you want to do some smaller work and or texture work, then I would also add the die grinder and carving burrs on the end.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we still have Christy on. Okay.
So Katie, I don't know if my camera's on. I think it was me that said about the bowls. So I made this with just like, I found a chunk of wood. Can you see my camera or not?
It's black.
Oh, there we go. Can you see? Okay.
Yeah.
So I made that, but it was basically an exercise in like, I don't know if you can, I can't see what my camera's doing because I somehow turned it off. Now I don't know how to turn it back on. So I made that out of just like, I found a chunk of wood that on the sidewalk that somebody was giving away. But yeah, it was just kind of like I didn't really know where to go with it. And all I had was an angle grinder. So it was just a real lesson in like, oh my gosh, there went a whole chunk of wood that that I didn't realize was going to go. So yeah, it was just kind of more like, I was kind of going, like the process of how much of the wood do you take away before you start using finer and finer tools? Do you try to get really close to what you want, or is it very rough before you go into the finer tools?
Yeah, I try to get really close to what I want. And I want to give like another tip that I use for when I'm doing like an internal of a bowl, and that is to drill holes to the depth that I want to go first. So like if I know I'll draw like a circle for the size of the diameter I want the internal to be, and then I'll drill a couple holes in the center to the deepest that I want to go, and then I'll kind of work out from there and not go quite as deep. And what that does is then when you're using the angle grinder, you just have to get to the bottom of that hole. And that can kind of that helps with depth. So to me, that's really something especially when you're new to it, that's really helpful, is to have those holes to your depths as a guide. And it's really up to you how deep or thin you want to make those walls. I mean, I've made walls that are 1/8 of an inch or less, which takes some finessing to not break through. And I've also done walls of a bowl as thick as 1 inch thick. And it's really just how you feel you want to go. But that's why I always start with the inside, and I figure I can then do the outside and go as deep as I want, while I continue to kind of feel along the way of like, no, I want it a little thinner, or I'll keep it that thick. And again, it just also allows me more to hold on to, because that was a hard lesson to learn. I'll just put it that way. I've thrown quite a few pieces of wood across the room in my process of learning. When you were using the angle
those
grinder,
are both super helpful tips. Thank you. Like I did exactly the opposite, like started with the outside and then went to the inside, and then was like, oh, I don't want to go too deep. And it's hard to tell how deep you're going because there's a pile of sawdust. And so awesome. That's helpful.
No, I'm just like you. That's the way I started too. And more than anything, I learned just safety wise, it's better to start on the inside and have all of that wood on the outside to clamp down to, so that I don't throw a log across the room. I was gonna ask, what did you have on your angle grinder? Were you just using like a sanding, like a flat disc on it, or did you have a carving dish on it?
I had just a carving dish that I bought off of Amazon because I was like, let me try and see if I even like this. And it was a fairly rough, aggressive sanding disc. So yeah, it removes a lot of material very quickly and was definitely a learning curve on doing that, but a lot of fun. So yeah, I'd like to try more.
Well, honestly, that's better than, I know people who have started out trying it just with those sanding flap discs that you can put on an angle grinder, and that just takes a lot of muscle to make that remove material. So I think you're better off the way you went about it. I think since you both kind of brought up good points too, I'll go ahead when I send out the recording for this. I'll just put some links to the different tools that I talked about and the brands that I've used. It doesn't mean you can't buy another brand at all. Not saying that at all. But just because they're ones that I use and I know about and I like them. So I'll send those links out also in that email. That way you can kind of say, oh, peruse the different options and see what there is to get started. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily the cheapest thing to get into, but like I said, most of these tools have lasted me years before replacement. So I think it's definitely worth the money, and the brands that I've used are all very good brands to work with. All right, so we're pretty much at the end of our time, but just to ask again if there's any other questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining. I hope you got everything out of it that you were looking for.